Thank you all for coming. Sorry for the technical difficulty in the short delay. I'm very pleased to have Michael Gibbons here, giving us our second Archaeology Society lecture for this term. I'll just give a brief introduction to Michael's work. I wrote it down, make sure you do anything. He's worked all over the globe and many projects, many excavations. In Ireland, he's giving a talk on Connemara Coastline today. Saying a little bit about the work he's done in Ireland. He's worked at the Donegal Archaeological Survey, or on the Donegal Archaeological Survey, the Galway Archaeological Survey, as well as excavations on Croagh Patrick. He's also worked on Boyne Valley, together with Michael, on St. Lazar's Island and on Copper Island. He's a member of the Nautical Archaeological Society, and some of his recent work includes mapping the intertidal zone of the Galway and northern coast. Tonight, he will be giving us this lecture, exploring the intertidal zone archaeology of the Connemara Coast. So we're very pleased to have him here. A warm welcome. And it'll be short question and answer period afterwards.
I'm going to talk tonight. I'm going to extend the coastline a little bit to the north and the south, taking into sort of historic, prehistoric west of the Shannon. So I'll be touching my toes into the Boyne coast and up Terrace and a couple of other places in between. But this is an image I really like. This is an image of the Connemara coast by Evans, John Evans, artist in residence in Eton College. He did 2 trips to Connemara in 1837 and 1838 and left us our earliest images we have of the Connemara coast. This is just one of them. It's a particularly nice one. It's a Brenby Castle, showing a group of people on the shore, a little buff on here, smoke coming out of it, fishermen pointing out the bay from a little mast marking the location of the little landing site. So, far Talbot's Trough, both the shore and the land. So, fishing farmers, the way of life on the coast for the last 7 millennia. Evans made 2 trips to this area. He was getting 45 guineas per painting, so it was worth his while. And he had a nice client paint, the aristocratic elite, British Isles at the time. But it's a really important piece of painting. There are huge importance in terms of 19th century settlement history on its coastline. More contemporary view, sort of going to dinner, you might title this. It's on the English Cay Islands. Which is really amazing group of islands off the North Mayo coast. Very rich sites, all sites. It's got a very nice intertidal zone landscape. Much of it created in the recent past. This whole channel here was gouged out since the 1840s, since the first edition map. So fairly large scale changes taking place on the coastline. And the sites I'll be illustrating literally go from the Mesolithic to the 19th century. And the sites and the monuments represent within this intertidal zone represents the peaks and troughs of that long settlement history. So there are periods where we know very little about them. There's other periods where it's absolutely, the landscape is rich in vernacular architecture and monuments, tremendous profusion. So the Connemara coast in particular has probably the richest cultural landscape, building landscapes on the Irish coast. So this is a map where we look. So we'll be starting lower down here. The English Cay Islands, for those who are unfamiliar with them, are way up off here. And that photograph was taken on a disconnected part of English Cay North. Now, this has been the last 30 years mapping a lot of this area here. And a lot of my time is on the shore and around the shore. Occasionally come on sites, as you do in fieldwork all the time, completely unexpectedly. And I was mapping a series of coastal sites on the North Clare coast, which is quite a short coast, steep-sided, from one section on Aughanish Island, which is a little disconnected part of County Clare. You have to go through Galway to get onto it. And as I sat on the shore eating my lunch in a wet, soggy day, I looked out on the shore and I noticed all these lines running down into the shoreline here. And I said, please, have another archaeological site. And as I got more curious about them, the tide dropped. And as I looked down to the shore, a series of these parallel lines emerged along the coast. And what they turned out to be is a series of trackways going down. Now these are 500 metres long, so photographs of telescopes, and they're about 20 metres wide. And there's a mile-long stretch of shoreline here, a complete man-adapted landscape here. And this is a previously unmapped seaweed farm on the shores of Muckish Island, on the sheltered northern side of it, in an area where there's no natural seaweed growing. So in order to get seaweed, you create a landscape by rafting in stones, digging them into the soil, rectangular stones, so that seaweed can get a grip, and you harvest them every 2 years. And when you pull away, and this site was actually harvested the next time we were there, and when you look at it with the seaweed removed, what you have is a series of these stones running all the way across. And these were built as part of the great Celt boom of the late 18th, early 19th century. They're very common in North Donegal, particularly in the Sinai Peninsula, Loch Swilly, Randall further west, down in Lettermack Ward, more recently I've put maps on there. In Achill Sound, between Corran and Achill, the whole shoreline there is lined with them. And at the foot of Crowpatrick, you have a mile-long stretch of seaweed farms, individual farms. Each strip here is an individual farm owned by a particular family. In that coastline, they're called Carrageenes. And I was talking to some local men, and he says many's river here was lost over those Carrageenes. And these Carrageenes became a critical part of the small farm economy, dependent on seaweed for fertilizer, but also as an important cash crop. So, further south I've got these now, are down in the Shannon Estuary, where I've recently identified a whole series of them. Enormous amount of work went into building these seaweed farms, but they're the single largest built landscape that we have in the intertidal zone on the Irish coastline. The earliest references that we have to them are on Dundrum Bay in County Down, where the Earls of Kildare in the 15th century had seaweed rights on the shore, and you have 1,000 little farms like this at Dundrum Bay, which is one of the small bays on the south County Down coast. So we don't know exactly, so a lot of these monuments are still floating in time and space, but they're part of this very large use of the landscape as part of this big Celt boom that kicks off here from around the 1750s onwards. The other very common site are quays and harbours of a huge variety of them. I did some work many years ago with Tim Robinson when he was first snapping in Connemara. I brought him around, showed him sites, and I had a car. I worked in the Galway survey directed by Paul Gosling at the time. And at that time we mapped 7 quays on Inishni Island. I've been back there recently, and I gave up at 100. And that island has, at its maximum, has I suppose a couple of hundred people living on it. It's a handful now, but it's got a whole series of these quays. Now these are fairly typical along the Connemara coast, particularly from Cusharrigan, Canton and Nilon, all the way out, where you've got your sheltered quay, your little shed attached to it, and then a clearway onto the shore. And some of these clearway can be up to 100 metres long, so a really large scale investment in the coastal zone here. Other sites, this is a site, a photograph I took with Marcus Casey many years ago, who were surveying Canton and Nilon and the area west of there. It's a fair area shot of Lettercalla. Lettercalla is a lovely hill, lower Lettercalla. And I spotted just the last shot of the day as we were coming in, running out of fuel, just a snake running through the landscape here. Didn't know what it was. It was years later before we got back out. Back out I did go. And what it turned out to be is an intertidal zone causeway. There are many of these causeways now throughout the Connemara coastline. There's a metre high, it's almost a metre wide, still in use. When I visited the site on the ground the first time the tide was in, and there was a line of cows walking across it, literally walking on water. And they were in a film of water about 2 inches on top of it, so you couldn't actually see the causeway. And it's linking up Inishganov with Lettercalla itself. And there's a whole series of these causeways. Again, probably late, and this one is almost certainly late. It's called Bohor na Nilon, the road the island here is Inishfarachan. You have Lethamore over here, and you have a series of very large causeways running out. There's one here, there's another one leading on, not too visible on this side. So it's a sort of series of interrupted causeways, creating a network of tidal islands and linking them into the larger islands. They're not linked to the mainland, they're linked to other larger islands, so easing your passage in and out. And of course only accessible really at half tide. So you're making an island less of an island, and you're making it more accessible to bring cattle in, people out, and so on. But a major public investment in this. This is about 300 meters long. Another site here, this is and the quay dates 1822. A causeway running in here, built in the mid-19th century, and next to it an intertidal road system. You can see here, bringing across. And when they built the quay in 1822 here, they left a doorway in the quay to allow access at low tide still, right away under the quay and right up here, Booker Bar. So this is over 400 metres long. It's a major construction project in its own right. It predates the causeways, but it was again an attempt to link these bigger islands with neighbouring islands. What date they are, we're not terribly sure. We know some of them were certainly built as part of the major relief works, and there's a series of relief projects launched into Connemara from the 1820s onwards, in the late 19th century. Just to give you a snapshot, however, of the sort of the archaeologically based landscapes we have along the west coast. The earliest dated sites we have here, North Connemara Coast is just west of Randall, Tullybeg, the late Mesolithic site. Another one down here at Fenor. Those are the two area sites. We have some early Bronze Age sites at Dunlahan here from around 2000 BC, more on the northern tip of Foamy Island, and then a whole array of early Christian dated sites, mostly coastal dunes and coastal milling sites. So a full range of sites. Again, they're reflecting the sort of contemporary landscape of the time. In the very south of Connemara Coast, between Galway City and over here, and Slinehead, it's an area devoid of any diagnostic prehistoric sites. On the granite lowlands to the south of the main Clifton to Gerard Road, very little in the way of diagnostic prehistoric sites. But when you look at the distribution of stone axes in particular, you'll see there's a lot of activity going on along these granite lands, which is not reflected in monumental archaeology, but it's there nonetheless. Sorry, let's stop moving. Okay. Among the finds that turned up, and this is one that was given to me by a son of a lobster man, and he got it attached to seaweed, corridor, which was he was pulling pots off the coast at Lethagesh. Lethagesh Beach, right on the mouth of just close to the mouth of Kerry Harbour. And this is a beautiful flint core, and it's not very sight, but this is retouching along its little nose here. And this had eroded out in about 10 metres of water, and it's very sharp edged, as you can see still. So what's that telling us? Well, it's telling us it's eroding out from the subsurface context beneath the water that's actively eroding, and that has only recently eroded out. Had it been eroded out for any length of time, the fine edges of the flake will be abraded back. You would not get these sharp edges. So it's a subsurface, probably from an intertidal peat or beneath an intertidal peat, which are very common along this coast. We have a whole heap of Mesolithic material turning up. Professor Whitman, when he published his book on Fergus Cove, he has a chapter on Mesolithic settlement in it. And he says the likelihood is that Mesolithic sites on the west coast are likely to be found as accidental discoveries, because there's no tillage, and so it's proven to be. This is a beautiful artifact here found just literally 200 yards or 300 yards from here. It's a minor point from a type site on that minor lock And there's two of these now, at least two of them from the Carol. And we're not quite sure what they were used originally, but a projectile may have been a spear point. And this is from Loch River Carl, right next to us here. Found in low water about 4 years ago. It's in the local museum here. The earliest dated Mesolithic site we have in County Galway is here, this little nose here. I worked on and off with Queen's University Belfast on sampling a series of excavations, of small-scale excavations on midden sites along the coast. And this was one of them. It's just a tiny fragment of the little Dal Queg midden. And the storms actually uncovered quite a bit more of it. This is as it was just before the excavation. And this is a late Mesolithic site. And more recently, the storm surges of a year and a half ago have uncovered an entire prehistoric landscape just underneath it here when the sand was swept away. And this intertidal zone forest. Now these forests are very common. They're not unusual. You get them at Barna Coast. You get them all the way out through Cusharga, out to Slime Head even, on Chapel Island, the furthest point you can go in County Galway. And then the Stegan Island off the north Connaught coast. And they're embedded in an intertidal peat. The Mesolithic site is actually up there on the nose, on top of that site. These are floating, likewise, we don't have a date for these, but we have, from Streamstone Bay, we have dated intertidal peats from around 4,500 years ago, so that's the sort of latest date we think there are. But this is indicating, again, sea level rise, very considerable sea level rise here, up to maybe 6-7 meters since the Mesolithic. This is an artifact from, again, tidal surge near Cleggan, the mouth of Cleggan Bay, where a very large shingle bank has been removed. And very briefly, and this was a problem with the storms, you have to get in there quick after the storms, because the storms, as they recede and the weather comes back to normal again, this coastal landscapes regrade quite rapidly, and features that are visible become invisible pretty quickly. And this is the remains of a deer carcass embedded in an intertidal peat. Again, I'm not sure what date it is, but really interesting site to date. I haven't been back to this site since I took this photograph a year and a half ago. And another site which I visited at the time was a wooden trackway on the shore at Double Post Line Post at Lethigash. And there was a carved timber piece as part of that collapsed in the intertidal peat. We couldn't remove it at the time. And the following day it disappeared. The sea had just trashed it. And at the time I didn't want to lift it because I thought I'd be able to come back the following day and have a closer look at it. So sometimes on the intertidal zone you literally get a very brief moment to get access to information, to rescue, because it's literally rescue archaeology we're dealing with. This site may or may not survive, I'm not quite sure. But it's likely that there's more material here. So these intertidal peats are constantly eroding, they're being eroded out, they're being uncovered. So it's a dynamic environment you're dealing with. And all along the coastline, this is the Michael H. excavations at Fenor, again the late Mesolithic site from around 8,000 years ago, right on the shore. Very surprising in terms of its location, because it's on a very low cliffs here. Doesn't look terribly attractive place in terms of a hunter-gatherer campsite. But there is a little suggestions of a little spring nearby, so perhaps they're utilising this. But if there's Mesolithic sites on this coastline, in this location, you can literally find them anywhere. And this girl on the right hand side here, Elizabeth Moyle, was home after the storms, and she found this rough out mudstone axe. These are very common in Clare. And I said to Elizabeth, you just ruined my day. I was 30 years looking for one of these. We have a number of mudstone axes recorded in the past, from Rossaville in particular, Dan Moore near Carrow. A week later, her niece was down on the shore and found this beautiful polystone axe. And these axes are from the Clare coast, they're from Fenor. These are identical to the Mesolithic artifacts that Michael Lynch has been excavated. You could literally place them in his excavation trenches and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. And Coon Coshin is a little bay near between just off Lettermallow, north of Lettermallow. And a local fisherman there told me about finding 2 stone axes when he was dredging for clue sheets of John, Bob and Jack, his name is. And when I went back to him, he couldn't find them, but he knew he had them, and eventually he managed to locate one, which he had left in his shed when he had dredged it up 30 years ago. And he dredged it up from an intertidal peak, as he remembered at the same time when he dredged it up that there was juice on it, there was bog timber in the bay as they were dredging out. So it's a whole drowned landscape, sheltered by the islands of Canton and Nival, and the slack water of the north is there is where a lot of the material, where it appears that you have drowned, intact, potentially Mesolithic sites in situ still. This is one of the artifacts, a whole series of artifacts turned up along the Kilkieran coast, at Ardmore in particular. And some of these are beautiful pieces, like museum piece artifacts. This is a small sample of various stages of, from roughouts to entire complete artifacts. A really wonderful assemblage. And they're being found not on the shore, but in the storm surge debris. So you're field walking for sites that were once underwater, who have now been smashed up. The contexts have been lost, and they've been thrown with the storm surge in onto the shore. So creating opportunities for field walking that you wouldn't normally get. So it's a whole new way of actually doing coastal field archaeology, is walking the shore, looking for material that's been cast up, which was once drowned. This is one group of local people, sharp-eyed. I walked over several of these without spotting them, only for them to be pointed out to me. I haven't walked over them. So some people have a very particular eye for monuments, and others have a better eye for artifacts. I tend to have a better eye for monuments. This is a well-known coast, Clare, and there was a lot of contact historically, of course, between Connemara and Clare. The people on this coast used to look forward every year, for example, up to the 1950s, from the turf boats coming from Connemara, bringing turf to North Clare. And of course, they also brought poaching to North Clare. That was the other. There was always somebody aboard ship with the poaching to be sold locally as well. But you had that big to and fro going back through Connemara into North Clare. And along the coast here, just east of Ballyvaughan, there's a series of very interesting sites. There's a series of 6 cairns on the shore, right on the lip of a limestone terrace before it drops into deeper water. So these are covered with high water, but as you can see, they're curved cairns. This is actually a built cairn. It's not like a dump of stone, it's actually got an edge to it. Now, I initially thought perhaps these are cairns that are gathering the stone prior to shipment, because a lot of stone comes from Clare and the Ireland coast to Connemara, particularly when you're building the finer detail, building quays, harbours, churches, the finer detail within late medieval buildings. And like on the south Connemara coast, it's coming from the coast of Clare and the Ireland. But this is much rougher stone. So these are potentially a cairn field. Are they prehistoric? They don't seem to be modern. There's no local tradition of these being associated with the export of stone northwards. And where you find them, they're very awkward places to ship stone out of. So they are potentially Bronze Age or Neolithic cairns. There's a line over here on the shore. But again, it's hard to, you really don't know at this stage. But it's a very interesting group. Further along on the shore, I'm sort of hopping back and over. This is really just to give you an idea of just the nature and range of material that you have out there. This is on Feenish Island. Now, on the Connemara coast, we have a whole range of coastal middens, but we have a particular group of dog welt middens. First excavated by Francis Henry on the Irish Cades, where it suggested one of them was a purple dye factory. This is a group on Feenish Island, owned by Michael Moylan. And it's very interesting archaeology. Here's your layer of dog welt. Running in a line, as you can see, these are all windblown. These are not in the original setting, but they form their own horizon. And then there's been this whole chunk slumped down. That's why context and dune systems have to be super careful, because you have kind of slumping intact of entire sections of a deposit into a different context entirely, but while retaining its form. And this is a very nice dog welt. Now, several of these have been dated. In Connemara, and South Mayo almost all dated between the 5th and the 6th century AD, so just at the beginnings of Christianity. So they're selectively taking Down Valley and utilising them. Whether they utilise it for dye or not, that's the suggestion. At Fergus Cove, the late Mesolithic site there, of course, was a large component was made up of Down Valley, and the Mesolithic site at the Randall coast was Down Valley. There are dated versions on the Mayo coast that are early Christian, so this is likely to be early Christian rather than area. One of the earliest references we have to storm archaeology, tempest archaeology, we call it, tempestology from the new term. As 1837, George Petrie described visiting Dogs Bay after a storm and seeing an ancient village, sort of scarab ray-like, emerging from beneath the sands as the storm blows, changes direction, and the whole village gets covered over again. And last year, as you can see here, the perfect 5-metre high section created, and a really lovely site here emerging, close to the surface. But in the dune system, what's close to the surface doesn't mean it's recent. Sometimes sites buried very deep can be quite, so it's a dynamic system in dunes. So they're moving over a long period of time. And a really nice hard side turning up here, and ditches either side of it. Not quite the village that George Petrie described, but a whole series of sites. This is just one of them here. You can see the double ditch here. There you have tense burning above. This is an ash layer, and then the charcoal horizon above that. But it's part of a larger settlement going along, or possibly a barrow, small barrow. Again, that side is graded back now, or was a perfectly sheer, nice, neat cliff. Is no longer. This is just a day or two after the storm. It's like someone's caught a knife and cut the way through. On the beach, hundreds and hundreds, probably a kilometre in total of sand by 20 metres were taken out in the storm. And with it all the archaeology that was layered on it. So walking the shore here is important because it's the only time we're going to get a really good sense of the settlement history of these sites, because the material literally spills out onto the ground. This is some work I did on the south-east Galway coastline here. I was mapping a series of coastal middens, and these are just some of them. And Inner Galway Bay now has the largest concentration of midden sites recorded from anywhere in the country, by a long shot. Some of these midden sites are 400, 500, 600, 700 metres long. Mulrooney Island is just one of them here. It's a little island here near Connemara Bay. And it's one giant, vast midden complex. So much so here that the midden material is actually coming up on Google Earth. That's the exposed midden visible. And this is about 400 metres, and it's one vast midden site. And there's a series of them all the way down through the island. And this bay here, what has happened is sea level rise has now broken up what seems to have been one huge expanse of midden sites into discrete little pockets. You know, this is a large one, but every one of these little headlands here has got its own dump of midden material, up to 2 metres deep in places. And in the intertidal trackways leading out to these islands, in the intertidal zone where the cattle are walking along the shore, you can see where there's digging down and exposing midden material. What date they are, we're not entirely sure. But here you have a very nice example of boulder clay here, a little bit of soil above it, and exposed in the section a whole oyster midden here. Again with peat on top of that again within the intertidal zone. So there's a range of types of midden sites here. Some of them very, very extensive. Similarly along here, along the Towel Peninsula, which we know has a hugely, hundreds of pilestone axes found here in the early part of the last century, reported on by a Reardon. And the coastal zone here, some very extensive midden systems, Ardfry, all the way down here. So this was a huge resource used right through into the medieval period here. Some sites, when you spot them initially, you think they're one thing, and when you come back and look at them again, you're looking at a whole different type of site. This is Loch Adney. It's near Bailey. And again, it's a site I photographed with Marcus Casey many years ago, and we thought it might have been a little tidal mill. And there's a little dam across the mouth of this river here. But Colin O'Connell, who's a local man, we show this side here, and this is the little dam here at the mouth of the river, and you have a canalized stream running down from it. And the canalized stream was designed to facilitate fishing on a fish trap. This is a fish trap complex. And here, Colin and Sean Cushla here on the left, we're fishing. This was a cohol net. It's made up of a bicycle wheel with the spokes taken out, and then discarded fish farm net used in it. It's about 5 meters long. And you might just pick out there's some white stones here. Those are whitewashed flat stones placed into the bed of the stream. And they had a beater stick to beat as the fish run up against the dam, and then as they come back down, they're trapped and usually beaten into the cohol net. A fish called stiffinines. Now further west in Connemara, they're called maracon, or mayers. And on the coast, of course, names of fish and seaweed changes literally from every parish. There's not a consistent naming of these fish. And what it is, it's a sand smelt that run up into these tidal streams and into these salt lagoons in April and May, a key time of the year when food was at a premium and having a nice shot of protein from sand smelt. Seriously important part of the diet. Here's some more here. There's a series on here. This is further west in Connemara, that's Erskine Mountain, on the Peninsula. A group, again, I was told about them. I came on them initially and I went up to the house, Nora, and I asked her about, did she want about them? She said, come back tomorrow. She said, John will be down with his cohol. And I thought she said cohol, but she didn't. She said cohol. And when I came out the next day, John had been down, that was her husband, John Folan, and he'd been fishing for marans, as we call them, or marathon. And he'd been fishing them with this cohol net. And I asked Mary, how do you know when to fish? She said, when the seagulls go mad in the lake. And the seagulls are Arctic tern, which nest in the salt lake when these fish run up into the lake to spawn. And there's a whole ecology wrapped around the migration of the maracon, and they fish them traditionally in April and May on the incoming spring tides, about 4 days a month. And as part of a communal system, every second house had a cohol net. And this is one of the last men, together with Colin, who are actually using this as part of their small farm world. But on this peninsula, everybody fished this particular set. There was 3 separate groups of fish traps on this stone lake. These are the fish. Very good to eat, by the way. They're like anchovies. And their importance was that in the small farm world, April and May are the hungriest months on the small farm. Everything is planted, but nothing is back in yet. And but this fish provided the sustenance and a major source of protein into these families. Further down on the Clare coast near Nuig, the Nance pub is here on the shore. We have a more classic fish trap which are common on the Shannon estuary. These are stone ones, of course, or you get them very commonly where we worked on the Waterford coast, on the river systems down there. Near Muckinish Island, a number of the fish traps complexes are associated, at least spatially associated, with some of the late medieval tar houses, which you get all along the north Clare coast and elsewhere as well. And here again you have, these fish traps are designed to catch fish on the outgoing tide. So we have a series of stone gardens here and little sluices between them where the fish, we think, we're not certain on this one. I was told locally there were lobster ponds, and that's often you get names associated with these structures, which ones that have been abandoned, and people are trying to understand what they once were. I don't think this would have kept out too many lobsters. It looks much more like a set of fish traps along close into the shore, but again, we're not entirely sure. And there are fish traps in the intertidal zone, nothing unusual on the Connemara coast. The largest complex is a photograph which was about a month ago flying south towards Shannon, and this is down at Doonmore, Doonbeg. President Trump's golf course is just up here, and this is a series of fantastic fish traps. These were fished up until 2 years ago, and these are hundreds of meters long. There's a little fishing net spot here, so when the tide comes in, the dropping tide, the fish drop back and then caught behind these large stone traps. This is the largest one on the west coast of Ireland. Some of them are clearly small-scale domestic operations, one family using them. Others were much more elaborate, whole communities were fishing them. Other strange monuments on the intertidal shore, of course, the intertidal zone, as it's risen by up to 7 meters since the first people settled on these coastlines. There's a whole array of material we simply don't know what they are, no context. And this is a lovely site here found by Michael and Tina Moylan on their colleague. It's down just near Carna. And it's a perfectly nice rectangular Neolithic house, if it has in any other context, on the shore here. The centre of this is clean, nice bedded in walls, really nice scale, like a small bungalow effectively in terms of plan. Doesn't seem to really work as a fish trap. I can't see how it would end, but if you look at the coastline where it's located, this is the granite lands of the south Connemara coast between Clifton and Barra. It's a very harsh environment. Very little in the way of diagnostic artifacts, particularly from early Green Street. So are we looking at here at a very early site here? We could well be. Of course, further west on the islands, we have this incredible Bronze Age landscape scattering across in the Shark in particular. This is the very far west end of the Shark Island. Large organic field system running underneath this large rampart here. It's the west end of the Shark. And we have at least one dated site. This is a trackway found on the shore near Lippa in near Barna by myself and Sean Cushla one day. And another local man found it at the same time. We must be there within days of one another. But it's a large palisade, large trackway, large beams. And this dates, we've got a date for this from 1600 BC. Now, Ben Barrow has done some work on it recently and has suggested that this is Fulloch the Fia. The bit, but I don't think it is. There isn't a Fulloch the Fia between Galway and Inishbofin Island. So I think it's unlikely to be a Fulloch the Fia. There's no bird-stone associated. But it's a trackway, I think, or maybe a platform of some sort in the intertidal zone. This is just after we came on it. Again, there's very extensive intertidal zone area here. And of course, earlier here, the famous barn and boat, which is now in the aquarium, was found here by a local team of archaeologists, our local archaeologists, which is a late Neolithic boat found in the early Neolithic boat found in a lagoon environment dating from around 4000 BC. Again, these trackways and the barren boat suggest a sea level rise of at least 6 meters on the coast since the Neolithic. Further north, of course, you have a wonderful site, Killadangan Stone Row Complex. Now, this is one of the wonderful Bronze Age sites which people have used to argue that Patrick was once a prehistoric ritual complex. I don't believe it. But there's your stone alignment. A whole series of standing stones here, now embedded in a salt marsh within the intertidal zone. So it's a whole complex from a landscape that's only been recently inundated by the sea, recently in the last 1,000 years probably. And it's part of a wider ritual complex here. More recently, and this was 2 weeks ago, we were out on the English Cay Islands. So I didn't get out to I had been out there since the big storm, but I hadn't got out to the northern tip of English Cay North, an area which I had identified as an intertidal zone field system a few years back. And if you want to see how exciting it is, there's part of it. 3 stones. Now, 3 stones aren't terribly convincing for most archaeologists, but they do me quite nicely, because if they're linked in with other stones, of course, you'll see. Particularly when the sand is eroded out. And this is on the north coast, where you have an enclosure now emerging. And these stones are set, well, they're in peat now, and the peat may be post-dating this enclosure. And there's a series of field walls running off it, right out into the tidal zone. So this is part of a drowned landscape on the northern tip of English Cay North. It's closely associated spatially, although we're not quite sure what connection that is bit with a very nice double-walled roundhouse here. Very similar to the one that John Waddell was excavating up in Slieve Moor, a roundhouse. Again, about a third of it is visible here. It's literally in the intertidal zone here. So there's quite an extensive landscape yet to be explored there off the north coast. The earlier one, of course, the earliest documented landscape we have was recorded on the Aran Islands in the 19th century. And Reverend MacBride published a very elaborate intertidal zone field system at Killaley, which thankfully is still there. This is it from flying in Gerard. Got a wall running here, another wall running this way, and a cross wall, a series of cross walls. And this whole duoc, this eastern end, this is the eastern end of Inchmore. There's hundreds of meters across. Still very well preserved and really visible. And at low tide, this is the tide just gone off, you can walk out and see the site. And when you follow it inland, you're going in onto the duoc, the sandy plain in Killaley. And on the surface, there's no trace of this field system, but with the wind blowing sand on, the erosion of that surface sod, you have the remains of the field system. So partially drowned in the sea, drowned in wind-blown sands. In what context is it? What date is it? Well, again, it's floating in a bit of time and space. We don't know. But that field system, it's grid-like, it's coaxial. It flows up through the dune system here, and you can also trace it just east of Champel Binnon, and quite a large, intact coaxial field system with round houses associated with it. So possibly a Bronze Age landscape, but we're not entirely sure. Some of these field systems in the Boyne are early Christian days, so it could be early Christian also. Individual artifacts, of course, also turn up on the shore. And the storms, there's a swan neck pin from near Manning Bay, a Hiberno Norse ring pin. I'm not one of these archaeologists who believe every piece of Hiberno Norse art represents a Lungfort. It doesn't. A shared cultural package. By the 10th century, it's impossible to pick out a Viking site in the 10th century. There isn't any diagnostic of them. We haven't been successful despite attempts to find them. There's none. So, but this is a really beautiful artifact. Again, eroding out. Then circle Latin cross here on the shore. So this is the type of range material that's regularly being found and can be found just from free walking on the shore. Now, I'm probably walking over this stuff all day, but if you're good at finding artifacts, which I'm not. This is one of the two crosses, for example, found at the north side of Inishmochan Island. Further down here you have St. Macdara's reconstructed church and an entire very, very interesting landscape associated with this. George Petrie's vision of it and visit to it on the pilgrimage day in the 1820s. And another wonderful set of images, again almost showing the identical scene here, right down the shore. The storm surge last year revealed an early cemetery just here, and a much later cemetery over to the south of the medieval church here. And there's also the possibility of a medieval harbour here. It looks very suggestive, just to the right of the boat there. In terms of cultural resource management, the local sergeant was sent out to retrieve the skeleton, and he took a pickaxe to the sand dune front and dug his way in until he found the skeleton and came away with the skull. That resolved all the archaeological issues associated with St. Macdara's Island, donated to the state somehow. So there was Blue Moor Road, but our guards obviously don't watch Time Team. So with a pickaxe to St. Macdara's Island is not recommended as good practice. That's what happened here. They didn't bring archaeologists, it was without. Absolutely cracked. So we're very weak in Ireland in terms of our heritage resource. We have no dedicated rescue unit. You think of the richness of the archaeology of Connacht. We don't have a government-funded rescue unit to do just even basic rescue archaeology. Just click anywhere. Click again.
You click on the other button. Your other button.
Oh, sorry. recently on the English K Island again. This is English Flora. Amazing, some fabulous archaeology there. Well, again, typical, you have a large midden site here, you have a burial site just eroding out here, and you have a 19th century partially sunken house here. So in these coastal dunes, you're getting a whole accretion of different layers eroding out, all ending up in a big tumble at the base of the cliff. And what it does give you is a sort of snapshot of the settlement history of the site immediately adjoining it. A couple of really fascinating sites further south. This is one of my most favourite photographs, taken by Daphne Mose, a wonderful scholar, published about 24 books on Irish history and archaeology. And it's the only known photograph of the pilgrimage to Boyne Valley, which is on the shore near Inverloch. And these men are looking at the track of the sails, the boats, they're arguing over it, others are trying to knock off pieces of the rock as a sacred relic. And we have a number of stone boats on this coastline, together and associated with subsea roads. So there's a whole mythic landscape associated with saints on the Connemara coast. Geologists tell you it's a big lump of granite, but they don't know anything about mythic landscapes. This is what it is today. It's very resistant to storm surges, so it's still there. But unfortunately, the local clergy a number of years ago moved it from the altar of Boyne Valley and built a new concrete altar closer to the shore, just about 50 yards from this. So the pilgrimage no longer goes to this particular rock. And associated with a series of holy wells, 2 beautiful holy wells associated with this rock. And of course, the Connemara Coastline has dozens of these. This is one lovely one on Moynish Island further south. Perfect bull on this one, down on the shore. If you want to see what a stone boat, another stone boat, this is on a Killarney. This one looks like a boat, as you can see. And there was a third one near Ochil townland for Greece. But the tradition of stone boats, of course, is common throughout Christendom. St. Catherine's boat in Provence, St. James's boat in Galicia, St. Declan's stone down in the Daisy, and you have a seaweed, Coldaff in Donegal, there's another one. Floating stones on Loch Ree. So they're part of that magical early Christian landscape that we were trying to come to terms with natural features and associated with the saints. Some early maps. Oh, anyone discovered America beyond me? High Brazil here, I just pointed out to you. Really, really interesting. As the 16th century progressed, you cannot sell a map of medieval Europe unless High Brazil is marked. By the 17th century, people have become a little bit more cautious, so it's pushed further and further out into the North Atlantic. By 1700, it evaporates and only survives in the folklore of people of the West of Ireland. But in 1426, the Italians have it marked as a prominent feature. As they've met people who sailed, who drank with people who definitely saw it. So it has to go on. But as you can see how coarse the knowledge of the West Coast was throughout the Middle Ages. Except Galway Bay is known, and so is Clew Bay. And they're arguing about it. I'm telling you, there's a big bay on the West Coast that's got loads of islands. And the Argyle is at the bottom. So what they do is they compromise. They make a massive bay with loads of islands. So it's an amalgamation of Clew Bay and Galway Bay into one large bay. But the Argyle is pretty accurate. So they have, and these maps of course improve. Further down, the largest complex of sites that survives on the Galway coast is this site, Corranroo Mill Complex. It's near, again, it's between Kinvara and the beginning of Bourne. And this is an inner, small little tidal mill. Very beautiful site. The outer mill is down here. And this has a date of 1704 on it, but that's the latest mill site on it. It's quite close to Crookham Row. It's very possible, the Cistercians, as you know, were pioneers in lots of things, particularly in agriculture. It's just possible that they may have introduced this tidal mill technology into the area. We can't be certain on it, but it's certainly a fairly elaborate complex. This is the smaller mill further upstream, and there's a whole set of linked canals linking it And when they built a later mill, the outer mill, and a massive mill dam, about 500 metres long, it drowned the inner bay and drowned this network of canals associated with the smaller and possibly earlier tidal mill in the inner bay. So it's a very large undertaking, this. Whether it's associated with the local landlords in the 17th century or earlier still, it's not clear. And there's no really has done any major work on it. Among the sites I've been looking at, of course, are medieval castle sites. This is a very famous one, Boyne Castle. Grace O'Malley married into this castle. It was demolished by the Gibbons when they built the present-day Boyne Castle on top of the hill. They didn't change their name to O'Neill's. They didn't complain bitterly about the building of the lighthouse on Sline Head and argued, in one case, the building of the lighthouse on Sline Head would be a major source of loss of revenue to their estate, and got compensation for it. But there's a whole maritime world around this hill. This is Crocadoon, recorded by Randall O'Flaherty in the 17th century as the site of the fort. It's also the parish of Omey and Ballindoon. The church site was here, just tucked in about here on the side of the hill. It was demolished to build the later castle. So when they built the 18th century castle, the Gibbons, having been shipped into here from Westmeath, they remodeled their estate when they get a bit of money together in the mid-18th century. They demolished the fort, they demolished the castle, and they built a new castle. And they built a harbour, very nice harbour, not great travel, but just here along the wall there. There's a very large dunes midland complex. And just in the water there, I was there at low tide last year, a series of it's either ballast, it's large limestone ashlar blocks visible after the storm in the intertidal zone. So it's either the remains of a wreck or it's where they were offloading ballast from Arran and either left it there or some of the timbers may have sunk in the bay. Some nice orchards here. There's a whole maritime world around this particular hill. Again, your 18th century landscape is all intact here. It's a fascinating site. This lovely reference here, I'm going to throw it in. It's about the wreck of the San Marco off the Clare coast, where they unsuccessfully tried to find it on the sea. This was wrecked off Quilty, and this is the description in George Carew. Our diver was nearly drowned, but Irish aqua vita had such virtue as I hope of his recovery. If the diver of Dublin with his instruments were here, I would no doubt bring good store of artillery from hence. For if not to be deceived out of our boats, we did plainly see 4 pieces more. Yet I cannot find any small piece of brass or iron. I think the inhabitants of this country have gotten them. Our boats are weak, Sir Thomas Strain's boat will do us good service, for we think to lay it away with ordnance, 2 of our boats being already loaded. Command some victuallers of Galway to bring us beer and bread and an oyster dredge or 2 to scrape somewhat out of the seas. There's a really fantastic account of the salvage attempt in the 16th century of the San Marco, which was wrecked off Quilty here in shallow water, and complaining that the Irish had got some of them, because we had salvage teams operational in the 16th century. O'Flaherty, in his account of Connemara, describes at Doon Castle, it's one of the O'Flaherty castles in West Connemara, there was a harbour for shipping. Harbour for shipping can mean an actual harbour, it can mean an anchorage, it depends on the context of it. But in this case, what was at low tide went down, you have actually a built wharf system below the castle at Doon Castle. So an actual built harbour here rather than an anchorage as such. This amazing set of charts from the 1690s are very informative in terms of gives us a nice introduction to the harbour, the Port of Arran, one of the most important harbours on the west coast. And this is the entrance to the Port of Arran. I'll just fly through it. You have a 17th century fort there. In the fabric of it, you have a remains of a Romanesque church, 2 fragments from the Romanesque church, an early Christian cross from an earlier building, and on the shore, an early map from the mid-18th Robertson's plan showing, as you can see here, we have the 17th century fort showing a harbour in front of it. And on the shore, lots of ashlar blocks, including the remains of a late medieval cross, hexagonal cross base from a medieval cross that sat in the middle of the medieval complex. That was found out on the shore here. So you might just pick out a very faint line going down through here. And that's the remains of the large ashlar key, big limestone blocks, which is perhaps the key represented on that Robertson's map of the early 18th century. And it runs out from a wharf that runs along here and comes on, and it's at the base of the 17th century fort here. So there's a fort, quite a substantial harbour here. And what happens, as you can see it here, runs right out into the shore. In 1822, the Rice Quay is built, this harbour is built. And the building of it, when harbours are built in the west coast of Ireland in the early 19th century, they cannibalise miners left, right and centre all around. Because it's always easier to rob stone than cut stone, so there's massive destruction goes on. So if you go on the North Clare coast, you'll find lots of the castle sites are all demolished. Not from any tsunami or from the Lisbon earthquake, but from the new roads that have been built as people are robbing stone to build them. And similarly here on Arran, the harbour of Arran disappears. Not entirely disappeared, still quite nice chunks of it left. Similarly on Inishbofin, where you have a similarly aged fort, this one more recently, the mid-17th century English fort, Cromwell's fort as it's called, or Don Bosco's castle, who have a very nice harbour. This was one of the first ones that came on years ago when I worked on the Galway survey. You have the fortress here, mid-17th century, and you have what was known as the lobster pond. But this is 90-metre long harbour, and it continues just vaguely. You can see a return here. This was an inner harbour where tenders would come in from a smaller vessel or from the bigger vessels, and it's a 17th century quay, an enclosed lagoon system. During the storm surge, knew to have been a building of unknown date was exposed. When we was building them, it was cut in two in the large late medieval middens. This should have been excavated. There was a large heart side exposed, 17th century pottery, Devonshire ware, and Madeira ware, and some nice 16th century, late 16th century pottery from Iberia found on the shore here after the storm. And of course the second storm hit a month later, and it's continued to erode out since then. So a really important harbour complex here from the 17th century. And on this side, as you go into Roundstone, there's a site called the Fort. Some things are so obvious you don't see them. They don't require, but it looks like a fort, as you can see, and it may actually be a fort. But we have a reference to the building of a fort in Roundstone Haven in 1708, built by the crew of a ship that left Macau during the Chinese rights controversy. The Jesuits were given permission by the Emperor of China to convert to Chinese. What a price. The Dominicans and the Franciscans complained. Complained to Rome, and the papacy adjudicated on it. The papacy came down on the side of the Dominicans and the Franciscans, said orthodoxy or nothing. So the Emperor of China expels Catholic bishops from Fujian province. They flee on the coast. They get into an English frigate in Macau in 1707. A year and 3 months later, they're blown ashore into Roundstone Haven, whereupon they built a fort. And they're there for a couple of weeks, 35 crew, and then 2 boatloads of troops are shipped out to Galway to build the fort. That fort hasn't been seen since. But it's called the fort. It looks like a fort. They later sail into Galway Bay. They spend 3 months waiting for a Royal Naval escort to London. And the bishop who's aboard ship is complimenting the local people on they're still loyal to the papacy. And they're commenting that the people of Galway aren't the real Irish. They're the English Irish of old. And these Catholic bishops can pick up that in 1708. And if you remember back, John Waddell published Golden's excavations on Arran. And on those excavations, in the excavation archive, there was a hieroglyph, a Chinese, there was a piece of jet with 2 Chinese characters on it. One was to go and the other was to come. Were found on Arran during the excavation. And nobody had a clue where it came out of. And people were looking suspect at what was the context for this? Well, nobody knew, and it was sort of pushed off. He published it, found that in his report, but he's not really sure about it, and no one's quite sure where he came out of. But now we have a context, because there was 5 East Indian ships in Noah Bay for 3 months in 1708, guarded by an English frigate. There's hundreds of men on each ship, and they're trading ashore. They're moving into the Iron Islands and coming in out of Galway. So there's a possible context for it in terms of these ships and these bishops expelled from Fujian all the way down there and end up in Ramsgate Haven in 1708. So intertidal zone archaeology has a big brief. This is a view of the fort. Now, sometimes in archaeology, when everything lines up perfectly, you have to be suspicious. Sometimes it can line up too straight a line. Because when you look at this, initially it's got a perfect fort look to it. But when you look at the history of the site, one of the men who lived here was the sidekick of Alexander Nemo. And you think, it was also used as an auxiliary workhouse during the Great Famine. And hundreds of people were kept inside this. And looking at the stonework again, said, well, your certainties begin to break up, and I'm not quite sure. So what we can say is, this may be the fort built by that crew from an English frigate, with 2 Catholic clergymen aboard, who write letters from Randall in 1708 to the Tuscan ambassador in London, asking him would he please pay the nice English gentleman who brought them to safety from Macau in 1708. Gourmet market, that's it. Introduction to
Thank you, Michael. Plenty of questions for and we'd like to invite you all to Sliding Rock, which used to be very recently Scholar Direct afterwards for Michael and company. So again, thanks for coming, and open questions to the audience.
Mike, you know the divers here from Dublin with their instruments. What do you think they were like in the late 16th century?
Well, we know they had a windlass to pump air into these diving bells, which were absolutely unbelievably primitive stuff. And that's probably what's going on there. They were useful up to about 20 meters of water, but they were absolutely, but they were super, tremendously dangerous. And they are salvaging. They're going out on mud, at Tobermory on mud, when they sank. An English spy went aboard the ship there and blew it up. But the same day, salvage teams. They're going in with salvage teams immediately afterwards, if they can locate the ship at all. Because that's very valuable ordnance. They don't want it to fall into the native Irish hands.
Yeah.
But it's just a really fascinating little glimpse of the politics around wrecks and what to do with it and the follow-up and all the rest of it.
It's also interesting, all your harbours and things like that. Again, it's difficult to date it, but I'm currently doing work along the Shannon, and the same thing is happening there. You're getting, a tower house with a pier, little slipways, and the circumstantial evidence is that they're medieval as well. That you have this whole kind of almost commercial landscape. I don't know if you know along the Shannon as well, not just along the coast. And nobody's done any work on the inland stuff at all for the medieval period. I mean, you've got Harman and Myrtle doing stuff for 17th century onwards, very, very little.
And of course, a lot of tower houses continue in use into the 18th century, so it's hard to nail them down. But you can't, they go into trouble building a castle, they go into trouble building a proper dock for the boats. So, they are trading in and out of these centres. And they're trading into towns like Galway with lovely medieval quays and harbours. So, I think certainly some of them are medieval in date.
Just a lovely picture of Doug's Bay there. You mentioned the hearth, but there seemed to be a whole layer of soil, as if soil had grown there at some stage.
But what you have in the dune systems, you have layers of solid horizons that then get
Covered
blown
sand.
and covered up again.
So the sod has developed and it's land.
Yeah, and then it's over top with a big blowout.
Yeah.
One of the sections of Dogs Bay, I didn't show it there, it's 500 metres long from a massive blowout. Because it cuts through a couple of minutes, you can see where
I
that
was there
blowout.
last year.
And it all backfilled in again, but probably quite quickly backfilled in. So yeah, that's why they're very tricky sites to navigate in terms of artifact, individual artifacts. Can be coming from above or beneath as these dune systems move.
But when you say a hard site, is that because there was a lot of charcoal in it, or could it just be a bit of wind blown?
No, it's a layer of charcoal with a whole ash pit underneath it. Like an ash pit, like 30 centimetres deep. But what taste it is, we haven't a clue. And on the south side, really interesting, on Trollgarrow, that's Port Nefado, that side. On Trollgarrow, on the south side, you had a lovely series of sunken houses, absolutely cracker sunken houses in this one. And you get them on Ome, you get them on Phoenix, and you get them in Algrac. I saw a number of them after the storm there. And these are nothing to do with Vikings. Chapeaus and sunken houses are something to do with it. They're nothing to do with Vikings. They may have something to do with them, but they're more often connected with their response to a coastal dune environment. And we have a wonderful photograph from Phoenix Island showing someone standing in a sunken house with a roof on it in 1895. But you have a series of them on Trollgarrow on the south side, associated with a set of ridges as well. But none of them visible on the surface.
And how do you identify them in the...
You have a daub floor, nice side walls, and then it's backfilled in. So like it's
Not
short
hard
to
to
say
spot.
it's a house written on it.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lovely cross section through, but you can only see them really well in the immediate aftermath of the storm surge, which cleans the face back perfectly smooth, tremendous clarity in it. Within a week or two it grades back. But there's several, Ome Island, there's 4 or 5 good examples of sunken houses that are clearly houses from the 18th, early 19th century. And one of John Evans' paintings, which I didn't show there, is showing a scene at Lettergesh with a little coastal settlement right on the beach with the houses just emerging from the dune, if you like, with a higher village above it. And we have a painting of one of these houses while it was still in use as a house.
Yeah, you had, I think there was a John Evans one of a Bully Hut as well in Ackle, which is a sunken house.
That's right.
Two girls, some guys bringing them presents or fish or whatever. Yeah.
And down at King Bay, because he seems to sail directly from Lettergesh or Rinval to Ackle, and there's no paintings in between. So he just seems to have sailed north.
Sail north. Yeah. And where are those? Are they in Eton or everywhere?
No, they're not. They're required just by the National Gallery of Ireland.
Yeah.
So I had the job of locating them in Connemara, which wasn't terribly difficult.
Like they're real places.
But they're actually real places. So I went into Boyne Valley with one of them. The tops of the mountains weren't visible. And the researcher, I got her out of the car, and a friend of mine who was at school with one of the farmers was coming down the road. League, and I said, go up to that man there and ask him about that painting. And I hid from view. And I could hear him, and he looked at the painting, and he was naming out all the mountains. Then he looked at it again, and there's a beautiful scene of thatched houses with some cattle in the foreground, the gardens in front of it. I could hear him saying, Christ, he said, that's Eddie O'Brien's old house. Which it was, the O'Brien's old house, 200 yards behind their present house. But he was able to people all the paintings from 1837. Because their family lived in the valley as long, you know. It was really, really interesting in terms of vernacular architecture in 19th century, vernacular landscapes and seascapes, as it happens.
Completely novice question. Do you have to approach intertidal dating, the dating of these places in a very different way than you approach
dating is very problematic because there's about 500 keys between here and Bonow. 500. The vast bulk of those, I think, are 18th, 19th century in date. But we have no dates. We have dates maybe on a handful, and those are only the government sanctioned ones. And so you have a lot of mimicking of what are official harbours or official structures, and people customising them. The range of other sites we literally, in the intertidal zone, it is very rare to see a site you can actually date at all. So you just build up gradually a picture over time, like much like field archaeology, except far more difficult, of course, because you're just getting glimpses of them. But in some cases, like the fish traps, there is a chronology now developed from work in County Down and Aidan O'Sullivan's work on the Shannon Estuary, where you can see a typology in certain monument types that you can reference. But for many monuments, there's still, they need to be excavated and scientific, you can't really judge. So all we're doing really is recording them at this stage. It's very coarse work, but it's the building block of all future work, just to record these monuments, where they are, the context of them. It'll be somebody else's job to fine-tune that in time.
Yeah. PhD students.
Oh yeah, there's a huge array of material on that.
There's a tidal mill, isn't there, Dunbrody?
Yes.
And I wonder if you're correct. I say you're right about the Corcom Road.
Well, it's a possibility because
Yeah.
it's the nearest Corcom Road is a Cistercian complex down there, just at the edge of the borough. And they decided people would be bringing in new techniques and new technologies into it.
Yeah.
Very interesting talk as usual. Please excuse me if I asked this question before, but you mentioned an area, I think the South Galway coast, where there's prehistoric axes.
At Fenor, that size of Fenor.
Yeah, but sort of lacking in diagnostic monuments.
Yes.
Is it an area where there would have been a lot of stone being removed?
No.
So there could have been. So do you think there might have been habitation there, or is it people moving in and out of the, say, tidal area that has led to
well, you have
deposition of material?
If you look at Canton and Illon, for example, which is a granite scoured landscape, would have been completely covered with peat till the 17th century. The islands are described, many of them, as all waste by Roger O'Flaherty. Now, he's not entirely reliable on O'Flaherty, but you do have little pockets of, little nuggets of sweet ground, tiny pockets of soil arising in them. I mean, little pocket woodlands scattered across an otherwise bare landscape. So I think you have people in that landscape, but at a level of material culture that's not reflected in there. They're just not there in numbers, and they're not there in enough sophistication, if you like, to have the resource to build a megalithic tomb or the Bronze Age landscapes. Because as soon as you move off the granites, you hit them, like it's instant. Once you move off the granites, you're into your regular stone rolls or Neolithic tombs or whatever. But the granite landscapes there's very little soil in them. It was always fairly impoverished ground, with the exception of pockets here and there. So I think it's a real, there is an empty quarter in terms of Neolithic monuments once you move west of Barna till you hit Cashel here. There's 30 miles by 30-mile block there, and I've scoured the place left, right and centre. Whereas if you go north, northwest, where you have native marble formations, you have glacial till, you have outcropping of limestone rocks, you have a natural suite of physical features which make early farming possible, ritual monuments possible. So the granite gaps are real. You go up into the Ross and Donegal, similarly, you have granite lands. You tend to find few diagnostic prehistoric sites on them. But you do have the artifactual evidence, which I think is earlier. It's probably Mesolithic rather than. So the Mesolithic, the whole that landscape would have been full of tidal waterways and lagoon environments, very rich in terms of birds in particular, migrating fish, sheltered lagoons, so quite a rich environment, sheltered waters for fish trapping, but not so productive in terms of a Neolithic landscape. So there's a lot of those stone axes are I think, are now Mesolithic as opposed to Neolithic.
Michael again for fantastic. Again, if you'd like to join us,